They call me Liam. I'm 20, a sophomore at State. And up until a few weeks ago, I thought I had my life pretty much figured out. Classes were manageable, I had a decent part-time gig, and for once, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. What a joke. Now? I don't know what I'm doing anymore. You know that feeling when the floor suddenly drops out from under you? That's my life right now. And it all started with a damn phone call. We ran a bakery. The sweet spot. Cheesy, I know. My grandparents started it decades ago, and my parents, Sarah and Mark, took over when they retired. It's not fancy, but it's a staple in our little town of Havenwood. Everyone knows the place, not because it's amazing, but because it's always there. People have been grabbing their morning coffee and pastries from us for years. My mom always said it was the heart of the family, and my dad, well, he'd drone on about our legacy. Growing up, I helped out at the bakery, mostly because I had to. Sweeping floors, restocking shelves, the usual grunt work. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a taste of what it took to keep the place running. My parents talked about passing it on to me, or my sister, Chloe, someday. Here's the thing, the bakery was never my dream. I respected it, sure, but I didn't feel that same connection. My head was always stuck in books, in school. I wanted something different, something more. College was my ticket out. Then there's Chloe, my younger sister, golden child extraordinaire. Seriously, she could fart rainbows in my parents' eyes. She was 18 and could do no wrong. Messy room? She's creative. Bad grade? She just learns differently. Meanwhile, I was expected to be perfect. No excuses. Chores? Always my responsibility. Good grades? Expected. Chloe got a shiny new phone for getting a B+ on her math quiz. I got a pat on the back for acing my finals. Not that I cared about the stuff. It was the principle, the blatant, obvious preference. I learned to live with it. I poured my energy into school, worked my butt off, and managed to snag a few scholarships. My parents helped a little, but I mostly paid my own way. Leaving for college felt like finally taking a breath of fresh air, a chance to finally focus on myself, without the constant family drama weighing me down. And for a while, it was good. Weekends, I'd visit home, help out at the bakery, then head back to campus. Not perfect, but manageable. Then the subtle jabs started. It's so nice having you here, Liam. You're so helpful. We don't know what we'd do without you. Subtle, sure, but the underlying message was clear. They wanted me back, full-time. Chloe? Oh, she'd breeze in, grab a pastry, maybe mess with the cash register for 5 minutes, then disappear. When I dared to ask why she couldn't help more, I'd get the same tired excuse, she's still figuring things out. So, yeah, that's the backdrop. College life was going okay, manageable, until that one particular weekend. It started like any other weekend trip back to Havenwood. Home-cooked meal, a little time at the bakery, then back to campus. But when I walked through the door, the atmosphere was different. Heavy. Ominous. My parents sat me down in the living room, like they were about to deliver some earth-shattering news. Chloe sat in the corner, glued to her phone, earbuds in. Already the scene felt rehearsed. Liam, my mom began, her voice tight. We need to talk. My stomach clenched. I knew this wasn't going to be good. The bakery. We're struggling, she continued. We can't do it alone anymore. Here it comes, I thought. The guilt trip. The plea for help. The sacrifice. We've decided, she said, pausing for dramatic effect. It's time for you to step up, to take your place in the family business. I stared at her, dumbfounded. This was happening. They were actually saying this. We want you to drop out of college, Liam. The bakery needs you. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My blood ran cold. My dad jumped in, as if on cue. Chloe isn't ready yet, he said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. She's still trying to find herself. But you, Liam, you're reliable. Responsible. We can always count on you. Count on me? To throw away my future? What the hell? My tongue felt thick and clumsy. You want me to drop out? I finally managed to choke out. My mom nodded, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. We need someone we can trust, full time. We can't keep running it on our own. You can always go back to school later when things are more stable. Later? Later could mean never. I glanced at Chloe, still scrolling through her phone, oblivious. And what about her? I asked, my voice rising. Why can't she help? My dad cut me off. Chloe will help eventually, but she's still young. She hasn't figured out what she wants to do yet. I couldn't believe my ears. She's only 2 years younger than me, I pointed out. Why does she get time to figure things out, but I don't? Why do I have to give up everything while she just gets to? What? Hang out? Chloe finally looked up, a smug little smirk playing on her lips. I'm not really cut out for the bakery life, she said, like she was above it all. I've got bigger plans. Bigger plans? Like what? Becoming an Instagram influencer? I turned back to my parents, begging them with my eyes to make sense of this madness. But they just stared back, their expressions firm, unwavering. You know how much the bakery means to this family, my mom said, her voice laced with disappointment. We've sacrificed so much to keep it running, to provide for you. It's time for you to give back. Give back? I repeated, my voice cracking. I've been working my ass off to build a future for myself. I'm paying for part of my own tuition, working a part-time job, keeping my grades up. And now you want me to just throw it all away because Chloe isn't ready? How is that fair? My dad's face darkened. This isn't about fairness, Liam, he snapped. It's about family. The bakery is our legacy. Without it, we have nothing. My stomach twisted. Then hire someone, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. You don't need me to do this. There are plenty of people who need a job. My mom shook her head. We can't afford to hire anyone right now. Things are tight. But if you come back and help, we can turn things around. We're not asking you to do this forever, just until we're back on our feet. So, basically, they wanted me to drop out of college and work for free. Fantastic. So you expect me to drop out and work for you without getting paid? How does that make any sense? I asked, my voice shaking with anger. My dad's face flushed. You're so selfish, he yelled. We've done everything for you. Paid for your education, put food on the table, gave you a roof over your head. And now, when we need you, you're turning your back on us. You think the world owes you something just because you're in college. That's when it hit me. They'd already made up their minds. This wasn't a discussion. It was an ultimatum. They weren't looking for my input. They were just waiting for me to fall in line. I'm sorry, I said, my voice trembling, trying to keep it steady. But I'm not dropping out of college. I've worked too hard to get here. I'm not giving that up. My dad's expression hardened. If you don't want to be part of this family, that's your choice, he said, his voice cold. But if you walk away now, we're done supporting you. No more tuition. No more rent. Nothing. You're on your own. They knew I couldn't afford to pay for everything myself. They knew how much I was struggling already. But they didn't care. I swallowed my fear. This was too important. I couldn't back down. I looked at my mom, hoping for some kind of reassurance, some sign that she didn't agree with him. But she just nodded, her face etched with disappointment. We sacrificed so much for your education already, she said. This is the least you could do in return. Chloe, of course, couldn't resist throwing in her 2 cents. Guess you're not as reliable as they thought, she said with a sickeningly sweet smile. I ignored her. My hands were clenched into fists, and I could feel a knot forming in my chest. But I wasn't going to break. I'm not dropping out, I said again, my voice firm. The room went silent. My dad's face was like stone. My mom looked like she might cry. Chloe just leaned back in her chair, looking smug. Finally, my dad stood up, his voice low and menacing. If you leave this house without agreeing to help, don't bother coming back, he said. I stared at him for a long moment, trying to process what he'd just said. Fine, I managed to say, my voice trembling. With those words hanging in the air, I walked out of the house. I didn't even bother saying goodbye. My dad's cold glare followed me all the way to the door. My mom didn't say another word. Part of me was waiting for them to call me back to say they didn't mean it, but they didn't. The second I stepped outside, the weight of the whole conversation crashed down on me. My heart was racing. My hands were shaking. I didn't know where to go, what to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there. Not after everything they'd just said. I drove to my friend Marcus's apartment. We'd been close since high school, and he was the kind of guy you could always count on. When I showed up at his door, he took one look at me and knew something was wrong. He let me in, no questions asked. I dropped my bag by the couch, feeling the exhaustion settle over me. "What happened, man?" Marcus asked, his voice full of concern. I just shook my head, unable to speak. He didn't press me. He just offered me a beer and told me I could stay as long as I needed. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing with questions and worries. How was I going to pay for school without my parents' help? What about rent, groceries? Most of my things were still back at the house. I couldn't just leave everything behind. The next morning, I knew I had to go back, not to apologize, to get my stuff. Going back to the house felt like walking into enemy territory. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, with the weight of the broken bond. I walked in without knocking. I wasn't in the mood to wait for an invitation. My mom was in the kitchen, flipping through some paperwork. She looked up when she saw me, her expression a mix of surprise and disappointment. "Have you come to your senses?" she asked, setting the papers down. I ignored the question. "I'm just here to get my stuff," I said. Her face fell a little, but she didn't argue. "You know, we're only doing this because we care about you," she said, her voice wavering. I didn't respond. I just headed to my room and started packing. Clothes, books, my laptop, the essentials. As I stuffed things into a duffel bag, my dad appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, watching me like he was waiting for me to crack. I kept packing. I don't see how staying here and giving up everything I've worked for is the better option, I said, not looking at him. "You think you're too good for this family now?" He shot back. "It's not about being too good," I said, zipping up the bag. "It's about not throwing away my future because Chloe doesn't want to help." At the mention of Chloe, my dad's expression darkened even further. "Your sister needs time," he said sharply. "She's not ready for this kind of responsibility." "And I am?" I asked, turning to face him. "You're willing to let me give up everything, but she gets a free pass? How is that fair?" He didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he just shook his head and walked away, muttering something under his breath. As I was about to leave, Chloe finally made an appearance. She sauntered out of her room, earbuds dangling around her neck, and gave me one of her trademark smirks. "Leaving already?" she asked. I didn't answer. I was not in the mood for her nonsense. "Well, don't let the door hit you on the way out," she said, laughing. I turned to her, my frustration boiling over. "You know this is your mess too," I said. "Maybe if you actually stepped up for once, none of this would be happening." She rolled her eyes. "Not my problem." I didn't have the energy to argue with her. I slung my bag over my shoulder and headed for the door. My mom was waiting in the hallway, tears in her eyes. "If you leave now, don't expect us to help you anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "No tuition, no rent, nothing. You'll be on your own." "I figured as much," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. With that, I walked out. The drive back to Marcus's place was quiet, but my brain wouldn't shut up. I kept replaying the whole mess with my parents, second-guessing every word I'd said. Sure, I knew I'd made the right call by standing my ground. There was no way I was throwing away everything I'd worked for. But, honestly, I was scared out of my mind. What if I couldn't keep up with rent or tuition? What if this whole thing backfired? The idea of being completely on my own for the first time felt way more real now. and it was terrifying. By the time I pulled into Marcus's driveway, I realized my hands were gripping the wheel, so hard my knuckles were white. For now, I just needed to breathe and figure out what the hell came next. Okay, so here's the update. Things have officially gone from bad to worse. I'm still crashing at Marcus's, trying to figure out how to keep my head above water. The first thing my parents did was cut me off. Phone plan gone. Rent payment bounced. It was like they were actively trying to sabotage me. For a second, I considered giving in, crawling back, and doing whatever they wanted. But then I remembered Chloe's smug face, my dad's disappointment. Nope, not happening. First thing, new phone plan. Got a cheap, prepaid one. Not ideal, but at least I could make calls. Then I went through all my accounts, making sure my parents couldn't touch anything. It was a mess. The hardest part was the money. My part-time job at the diner barely covered my books before this whole thing went down. Now? Rent, bills, groceries. I was screwed. I managed to pick up some extra shifts at the diner. It wasn't much, but it was something. And I went to the financial aid office at school, swallowed my pride, and begged for help. They were surprisingly understanding, helped me apply for an emergency scholarship and a small loan. Meanwhile, my parents went full on nuclear on social media. A barrage of messages, guilt trips, accusations. Dad, you're being selfish. Come back and fix this. Mom, you're tearing the family apart. Chloe, you're so stupid for not taking the easy path. Easy path? She hadn't lifted a finger to help the bakery. Then came the extended family. Apparently, my dad had been telling everyone that I'd abandoned the bakery. That I was an ungrateful kid. Some of my cousins were supportive, but others just bought into my parents' version of the story. It was exhausting. I felt like I was fighting a war on all fronts. Financially, emotionally, and within my own family. Marcus has been a rock through all of this. You're doing better than most people would, he told me one night. I didn't feel like I was doing well at all, but hearing him say that helped. A little. So, here's the plan. Tight budget. Cut every unnecessary expense. Look for a better paying job. Hope the scholarship comes through. My parents are still sending messages, their tone shifting. My dad is still angry, but my mom sounds desperate. They say Chloe's struggling, that they need me to come back before it's too late. Maybe the bakery really is collapsing. Or maybe it's just another manipulation tactic. Either way, it doesn't change my decision. I'm holding my ground. For now, things have taken a turn for the truly insane. Remember how I said my parents were struggling to keep the bakery afloat? Well, it's worse than I thought. Way worse? Apparently, the place is on the verge of going under. Shelves are empty, quality is slipping, and my parents are stressed beyond belief. My friend Chloe, the other Chloe, not my sister, mentioned seeing an eviction notice on the door. Curious, I started digging around. I didn't want to talk to my parents, but I did some snooping online, asked around. And that's when I found out the truth. My parents didn't just take out a loan to keep the bakery running. They took out a massive loan, using the bakery as collateral. And guess what they used the money for? Chloe! Not my mental stability ruining sister. My gaming cafe. Apparently, my parents weren't just trying to save the bakery. They were trying to fund Chloe's latest whim. A high-end gaming cafe. Seriously. Chloe, who can barely make toast without burning it, wants to run a business. My parents mortgaged the bakery and part of their house to make it happen. Looking back, it all makes sense. The pressure on me to quit school wasn't just about preserving the family business. It was about covering for Chloe's failure. They needed me to keep the bakery running while they funneled money into her pet project. And where is Chloe in all of this? Nowhere to be found. They were willing to throw my future under the bus to prop up her dreams. And they didn't even have the decency to be honest about it. I'm furious. I've been struggling to make ends meet, while they've been bending over backwards to support Chloe's fantasy. and she just sits back and watches, oblivious to the damage she's causing. I made the right decision by walking away. If I'd stayed, I would have been nothing more than a band-aid for a problem I didn't create. But it's not easy. The bakery's been a part of my life for so long, and I know how much my parents have sacrificed for it. But this is a mess they created. For now, I'm just focusing on myself. School, work, survival. I don't know what's going to happen with the bakery, and I don't know if my relationship with my parents can ever recover. This is it. The end of the line. I found out about the loan, about Chloe's gaming cafe, and I was already pissed. But then my mom called, out of the blue, using a blocked number. I almost didn't answer. I wish I hadn't. She sounded broken, on the verge of tears. For a second, I thought she was finally going to apologize. But no, we need you to come back, she said, her voice trembling. She went on about how the bakery was in trouble, how Chloe's project hadn't worked out. She didn't give me specifics, but it was clear that whatever dream she'd sold them on had crashed and burned. Chloe's struggling, she sobbed. She's not handling the pressure well. Your father and I are doing everything we can, but we can't do this without you. Even after everything, they were still prioritizing Chloe. Why would I do that? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. You cut me off, told me I wasn't part of the family anymore. And now you expect me to come back like nothing happened? She started crying, saying they didn't mean it, that they'd always cared about me. But when I pressed her about the loan, about Chloe's involvement, she got defensive, said they were just trying to help her find her path, that sometimes you have to take risks for family. I told her that risking the bakery and their home on Chloe's pipe dream was reckless, especially when she had no experience. She didn't have much to say to that. Just, we thought it would work out. Then my dad got on the phone. He was furious. Accused me of abandoning them, of being selfish. This family raised you, gave you everything, and now you're turning your back on us when we need you most. You didn't need me when you decided to mortgage the bakery for Chloe, I snapped. You didn't need me when you cut off my tuition. You only need me now because you're out of options, and Chloe can't fix this mess. He got even angrier, saying I had no idea how hard they'd worked, how much they'd sacrificed. Sacrifice? The first yelled. You're the ones who chose to risk everything for Chloe. You didn't ask me what I thought. You didn't care what it cost me. So don't act like I owe you anything. I hung up. The call left me shaken. But it also confirmed what I'd been avoiding. I needed to cut them out of my life completely. Every interaction just reopened old wounds. Speaking of Chloe, she sent me one last message. A long rant about how I was letting the family down, how she was trying her best. She even tried to blame me, saying that if I'd stayed and helped, things might have gone differently. I didn't respond. What was the point? So, here's where I'm at. I've blocked all of them. My parents, Chloe, the meddling relatives. Changed my phone number. Told my friends to ignore any messages they might get from my family. It's not easy, but I can't keep putting myself in situations where I'm treated like a backup plan. I'm focusing on school, on work, on rebuilding my life. It's not perfect, but it's the right path. Thanks to everyone who's read and supported me through this. Your kindness has meant more than you know. I'm signing off now. If you're ever in a situation like mine, remember, you're allowed to put yourself first. Take care. The silence after I blocked them out was deafening. A weird, empty quiet replaced the constant hum of guilt trips and accusations. For the first few days, I jumped at every ringtone, every notification, expecting it to be them finding a new way to reach me. The paranoia was exhausting. Marcus was a saint. He didn't pry, didn't offer platitudes, just made sure I had food, a place to crash, and a listening ear when I needed it. His girlfriend, Olivia, was amazing too. She'd been through her own family drama and seemed to just get it. They were both incredibly supportive without smothering me. Classes were a blur. I was running on fumes. fueled by cheap coffee and sheer stubbornness. My grades were slipping, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Every spare second was spent at the diner, scrubbing dishes and wiping tables, trying to earn enough to keep the lights on. The diner, ironically, became my refuge. The clatter of plates, the sizzle of the grill, the low murmur of conversations, it was a distraction, a buffer against the loneliness creeping in. My boss, Maria, was a tough but fair woman. She saw I was working my ass off and gave me extra shifts whenever she could. She even let me grab a free meal now and then, which made a huge difference. But the ghosts still haunted me. I'd catch myself thinking about the bakery, wondering if it was still standing, if my parents were managing to keep it afloat, if Chloe had finally decided to lift a finger. I'd drive past it sometimes, just to see. The windows were usually dark, the open sign unlit. It looked like a tomb. The hardest part was the holidays. Thanksgiving rolled around, and suddenly, the weight of my decision hit me like a ton of bricks. I spent the day with Marcus and Olivia's family. They were welcoming and kind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an imposter, an outsider looking in. Every laugh, every shared memory reminded me of what I'd lost. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every argument, every painful word. Was I being too harsh? Was I making a mistake? I almost unblocked my mom's number. I almost reached out, just to see how they were doing. But then I remembered the look on my dad's face when he told me to leave, the smug grin on Chloe's face, and I stayed my hand. Christmas was even worse. The town was decked out in lights and decorations, but all I felt was emptiness. The sweet spot used to be a centerpiece of the town's holiday cheer, with its festive window displays and the smell of gingerbread wafting down the street. Now, it was just another dark storefront. Marcus and Olivia tried to cheer me up, but I was a black hole sucking all the joy out of the room. I felt like I was trapped in a parallel universe, watching my old life play out without me. The new year brought a flicker of hope. The emergency scholarship I'd applied for finally came through. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but it eased the financial pressure. And I found a second part-time job working nights at a bookstore. The pay was minimum wage, but the atmosphere was quiet and calming. Surrounded by books, I felt a small sense of peace. Slowly, gradually, I started to rebuild. I focused on my studies, on my work, on finding small moments of joy in the everyday. I joined a study group, made a few new friends. I started going to the gym, just to clear my head. I even started dating. Nothing serious, just casual coffee dates and movie nights. It was nice to connect with someone, to feel a sense of normalcy. But the past still lingered, a shadow lurking just beneath the surface. One day, I got a letter. Not a bill, not junk mail, but a handwritten letter. It was from my grandmother. My grandmother, Helen, had always been the quiet, steady force in our family. She wasn't one for drama or conflict. She just quietly loved, supported, and offered a comforting presence. My dad's mother. The letter was simple, heartfelt. She said she knew I was going through a difficult time, that she didn't understand all the details, but she wanted me to know she was thinking of me. She didn't take sides, didn't offer advice, just expressed her love and concern. The letter ended with an invitation. She invited me to come visit her at her house. No pressure, she wrote, just a chance to talk if I wanted to. I hesitated for days. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend like it didn't exist. But something about her sincerity, her lack of judgment, drew me in. Finally, I decided to go. Her house was small and cozy, filled with the scent of lavender and old books. She greeted me with a warm hug, her eyes filled with love. It was the first genuine affection I'd felt in months. We sat in her living room, sipping tea and talking about everything but the bakery. We talked about school, about my jobs, about my life. She listened patiently, offering gentle smiles and nods of encouragement. Finally, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I haven't talked to my parents, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Not since I left. She didn't interrupt. She just waited for me to continue. They want me to come back, I said, to save the bakery. But I can't. I can't give up everything I've worked for. And I can't keep being their backup plan. Her eyes filled with understanding. I know, dear, she said softly. You have to do what's right for you. But they're my family, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. I don't want to lose them. But they just don't see me. They only see what they want me to be. She took my hand in hers, her touch warm and comforting. Sometimes, family can hurt you the most, she said. They can be so blinded by their own expectations that they forget to see who you really are. It doesn't mean they don't love you, but it does mean you have to protect yourself. We talked for hours, sharing stories and memories. She told me about her own struggles with her family, about the times she had to make difficult choices to protect her own well-being. She didn't offer easy answers, but she offered validation, a sense that I wasn't alone in this. Before I left, she gave me a hug and whispered in my ear, "You're stronger than you think, Liam. You'll get through this." Her words gave me a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to rebuild my life, to create a new kind of family, one that valued me for who I was, not for what they wanted me to be. As I drove away from her house, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. The ghosts of the past were still there, but they seemed a little less menacing, a little less powerful. I still didn't know what the future held, but I knew I wasn't alone. A few weeks after my visit with my grandmother, I got another phone call. This time, it was my dad. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "Liam," he said, his voice sounding tired and defeated. "I need to talk to you." I hesitated. "About what?" "About the bakery," he said. "About everything," I sighed. "What is there to talk about? You made your decision. I made mine." "I know," he said. "And I think I was wrong." My heart skipped a beat. This was unexpected. "I've been thinking about what you said," he continued, "about how we were prioritizing Chloe over you, about how we weren't seeing you for who you really are." He paused, and I could hear him struggling to find the right words. "You were right, Liam. We messed up. We put too much pressure on you. We let Chloe's dreams blind us to what you wanted. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything. I just listened." "The bakery. It's gone," he said, his voice cracking. "We couldn't keep it afloat. We lost everything. Our house, the business, everything." My stomach dropped. Despite everything, I didn't want that to happen. "Chloe? She's not doing well," he continued. "She's struggling to cope with the loss. Your mother and we're trying to help her, but it's not easy." He paused again. "I don't expect you to forgive us," he said. "I know we hurt you deeply, but I wanted you to know. I wanted you to know that I understand now, that I see you, and that I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, for building a life on your own terms." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, I love you, Liam," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing. So much had happened, so much had changed. I love you too, Dad," I managed to say, my voice trembling. We talked for a few more minutes, mostly about practical things, about where they were living now, about how they were managing. I offered to help in any way I could, but he refused, said they didn't want to burden me. Before we hung up, he said, "Maybe, someday, we can rebuild our relationship. But for now, I just want you to be happy, to be successful, to be you." That phone call didn't magically erase the pain of the past. It didn't suddenly make everything right. But it did offer a sense of closure, a sense of hope. I still had a long way to go, but I was no longer carrying the weight of my family's expectations. I was free to build my own life, to pursue my own dreams, and that, more than anything, was worth fighting for. A few weeks later, I saw Chloe in town. She looked different, more subdued, more real. We made eye contact, and for a moment, I thought she was going to turn away. But she didn't. She walked over to me, her expression hesitant. "Hey," she said, her voice quiet. "Hey," I replied. We stood there in silence for a moment, unsure of what to say. I wanted to apologize," she finally said. "For everything. For being selfish? For making things harder than they needed to be." I nodded. "I appreciate that," I said. "I was wrong," she continued. "About everything. About the bakery. About you!" I thought I was so smart, so special. But I was just lost. "I know," I said. "We all are, sometimes. I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "But I wanted you to know. I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better, to be a better person, to be a better sister." I smiled. "I believe you," I said. We talked for a few more minutes, about her plans for the future, about her struggles. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, but it was a start, a small bridge built across a wide divide. As I walked away from her, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The ghosts of the past were finally fading, replaced by the promise of a brighter future. My life wasn't perfect. It was still messy, still uncertain. But it was mine. And that, more than anything, was enough. Years later, I stood in the doorway of my own bakery. It wasn't Havenwood, wasn't trying to recreate the sweet spot. It was my place, in a different town, with a completely different vibe. Modern, bright, and full of innovative pastries and a damn good espresso machine. I'd scraped and saved, working my way through college, eventually graduating magna cum laude. A detail I knew would sting my dad even if he'd never admit it, and learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. It was called Liam's Confections. Simple, but it felt right. The aroma of cinnamon and freshly baked bread filled the air, mingling with the chatter of happy customers. I looked around at the bustling scene, the baristas expertly crafting lattes, the customers laughing and chatting over pastries, the sunlight streaming through the large windows. A sense of profound satisfaction washed over me. I'd built this on my own. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "Heard you're doing a special on those new croissants. Think I can swing by later?" I smiled and texted back. "Always room for you, buddy." First one's on the house, then another text. This one was from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. A familiar pang of anxiety tightened my chest. Was it them? Had they found me again? I took a deep breath and opened the message. It was a picture. A grainy, slightly blurry picture. It showed my mom and dad standing in front of a small, unassuming bakery in some town I didn't recognize. They looked older, worn, but there was a hint of a smile on their faces. Scrawled across the picture was a simple message. "We're trying again. Miss you, Mom and Dad." Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time they weren't tears of pain or anger. They were tears of something close to forgiveness, something close to understanding. I didn't text back. Not yet. But I saved the picture. Later that day, Chloe walked into my bakery. She was dressed casually, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked good, healthy, happy. "Hey," she said, her voice a little nervous. "Heard you were doing a special on croissants." I laughed. "Word travels fast," I said. "What can I get for you?" She ordered a croissant and a coffee, and we sat at a small table by the window, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her new job, about her friends, about her life. It was ordinary, mundane, but it felt real. As she got up to leave, she turned to me and said, "You know, Mom and Dad are really proud of you. They might not always show it, but they are." I smiled. "I know," I said. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out and gave me a hug. "Thanks for everything, Liam," she said, "for being the bigger person, for showing us the way." I watched her walk out of the bakery. a sense of peace settling over me. I wasn't sure what the future held. I didn't know if my relationship with my family would ever be fully repaired, but I knew one thing: I was finally free. Free to be myself, free to create my own life, and free to make the sweetest confections I could possibly imagine. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating the pastry case, filled with rows of perfectly crafted croissants, cakes, and cookies. This was my sweet spot, and it was all mine.